Hello everyone, it is Evely, and today I'm going to tell you a story. Enjoy your viewing and good luck. Lilia was a vision of grace and beauty, the kind that turned heads in any room. Her hair, a cascade of golden silk, framed delicate features that seemed almost otherworldly. In her small village on the outskirts of the forest of Durnhold, her beauty was both a gift and a curse. Men adored her. Women whispered cruel things behind her back. Jealousy brewed like a toxic fog in the hearts of those who could not possess what Lilia naturally had. Charm, kindness, and beauty that seemed to glow from within. But jealousy does not merely fester, it devours. One autumn night, when the village celebrated the annual harvest festival, the whispers about Lilia reached their crescendo. She had danced in the moonlight, her white dress swirling like a spirit, her laughter ringing like silver bells. It was too much for some to bear, especially for Yvette, the mayor's daughter. Yvette was everything Lilia wasn't. Plain, spiteful, and consumed by bitterness. That night, Yvette's envy turned into something far more sinister. Gathering a group of like-minded villagers, those who had grown tired of Lilia's effortless perfection, Yvette hatched a plan. She told the others that Lilia was a temptress, a witch who used her beauty to manipulate men and curse women. Fueled by wine and malice, they dragged Lilia from the festival, her cries of protest swallowed by the cheering crowd. They marched her into the forest, far from the safety of the village lights. Lilia struggled, tears streaming down her face, but the mob was merciless. They stripped her of her dignity, tearing her dress and cutting her hair, mocking her as she sobbed. They bound her hands and left her in the heart of the forest, a place no one dared to venture after dark. The forest of Durnhold was a place of legend, said to be haunted by ancient spirits who thrived on despair and sorrow. The villagers laughed as they left her there, their taunts echoing through the trees. But their laughter faded as they retreated, leaving Lilia alone in the suffocating darkness. She was cold, humiliated, and broken. The forest pressed in around her, its twisted branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick and damp, carrying the faint smell of decay. Lilia could feel her life slipping away as she lay on the forest floor, her body trembling with cold and fear. She closed her eyes, her tears mixing with the dirt on her face. That's when she heard it. A voice, soft and melodic, yet heavy with an unplaceable weight, whispered her name. Lilia! Her eyes shot open, but she saw no one. Only the trees swaying in the faint breeze and the impenetrable darkness beyond. She tried to convince herself it was the wind, but the voice came again, stronger this time. Lilia, child of sorrow. It wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to echo from everywhere at once, weaving through the trees and wrapping around her like a shroud. Her heart thundered in her chest as the shadows around her seemed to grow deeper, more alive. "Who's there?" she managed to choke out, her voice trembling. A figure began to emerge from the darkness. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Its form shifted like smoke, at times taking on the shape of a tall man, then dissolving into a mass of writhing shadows. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed like embers, piercing through the gloom. "I am the keeper of the hollow," the figure said, its voice reverberating through the air. "I have watched your pain. I have heard your cries. The world has wronged you, child." Lilia felt her breath catch in her throat. The figure radiated an overwhelming presence, an ancient and terrible power that made her feel both terrified and strangely comforted. "They left you here to die," the keeper continued, its voice dripping with disdain. "But you do not have to accept this fate. I can offer you a gift, a chance to reclaim your power, to make them feel the pain they have inflicted upon you." What do you want from me?" Lilia asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The keeper's form shifted, growing closer, its ember-like eyes locking onto hers. "Your humanity," it said simply. "Cast aside the fragile thing you call a soul, and I will grant you power beyond your imagining. You will become a force of the forest, eternal and untouchable. No one will ever harm you again." Lilia hesitated, her mind racing. The keeper's words were tempting, Too tempting. She thought of Yvette's smug face, the jeering villagers, the way they had humiliated her and left her to die like an animal. Anger and hatred churned within her, burning away her fear. "What will happen to me?" she asked. "You will no longer be bound by mortal constraints," the keeper said. "You will become one with the hollow, a vessel of vengeance and wrath. But you will never again be the girl you were." Lilia's heart pounded as she considered the choice before her. She had always been kind, always tried to see the good in people. But where had that gotten her? Stripped, humiliated, and left to die alone in the darkness. "Do you accept?" the keeper asked, its voice now a low growl. Lilia closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. The keeper's laughter echoed through the forest, a deep, guttural sound that made the trees shudder. Shadows began to swirl around Lilia, enveloping her in a cocoon of darkness. She screamed as the shadows pierced her skin, searing her flesh and filling her veins with ice. Her body twisted and contorted, her bones cracking and reshaping. When the transformation was complete, Lilia was no longer the broken girl who had been left to die. Her golden hair was now as black as the night, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Her once delicate features had taken on a sharp, almost predatory edge. She rose to her feet, her movements fluid and unnatural. The forest seemed to bow before her, the trees creaking and groaning as if in submission. Lilia could feel the power coursing through her, a dark and intoxicating energy that made her feel invincible. And with that power came a singular purpose: revenge. Lilia stood in the silence of the forest, her new form pulsing with unnatural energy. Every tree, every shadow, every tendril of mist whispered to her in languages she had never known. She could feel the forest itself breathing, alive and connected to her will. Where once she had been a frightened girl, now she was something else entirely, a creature born of rage and sorrow. The keeper of the hollow lingered in the darkness, watching her transformation with a twisted pride. Its ember-like eyes glowed faintly as it spoke. "Go, child of the hollow. Reclaim what was stolen from you. Bring your wrath upon those who sought to destroy you." Lilia needed no further encouragement. With a thought, the forest seemed to part for her, the branches shifting aside to create a path back toward the village. Her movements were impossibly swift, her bare feet barely brushing the forest floor as she glided through the trees. The once dense woods now felt like an extension of her body, each root and shadow bending to her will. The first sign of her approach was the stillness. The village of Durnhold, normally alive with the sounds of animals and nighttime festivities, fell eerily silent. The crickets stopped chirping. The dogs that roamed the streets whimpered and cowered, sensing something unnatural in the air. A thick fog began to roll in, seeping into every corner of the village, blanketing it in an oppressive gloom. Lilia reached the outskirts of the village and stopped, her glowing eyes scanning the scene before her. Lanterns flickered in the thickening fog, their light dimmed by her presence. She could feel the fear beginning to spread among the villagers. It was intoxicating. Her first target was Yvette. Lilia remembered the way Yvette had laughed as she had been dragged into the forest, her voice sharp and venomous. She found her easily, sitting in her father's grand house, surrounded by luxury. Yvette was sipping wine and smiling as she regaled her friends with the tale of how they had dealt with the witch. Lilia didn't need to knock or enter through the door. She simply appeared. One moment, Yvette was laughing with her friends. The next, the room was plunged into darkness, the air thick and suffocating. What's happening?" Yvette stammered, standing abruptly. Lilia stepped forward, her silhouette materializing from the shadows. Her blackened hair swirled around her like smoke, and her glowing eyes burned with malice. The laughter and bravado drained from Yvette's face as she realized who stood before her. No, it can't be Lilia." But the creature that was once Lilia smiled, her teeth sharp and gleaming. "You left me to die," she whispered, her voice carrying a cold, otherworldly echo. "Did you think I would simply disappear?" Yvette screamed, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the darkness. The shadows in the room came alive, stretching and twisting, pinning Yvette to the wall. Her friends scrambled to escape, but the fog outside the house seemed to thicken, blocking the doors and windows. "You took my dignity," Lilia hissed, stepping closer to Yvette. "Now, I'll take everything from you." The shadows began to writhe and constrict, and Yvette's screams turned to choked gasps as the life was drained from her body. By the time the darkness receded, Yvette was nothing more than a withered husk. Her once pristine features twisted in terror. The fog outside the house dissolved, and the remaining villagers stumbled out, their faces pale with fear. But Lilia was not done. Word spread quickly through Durnhold that something monstrous had returned from the forest. The villagers barricaded their doors, lighting candles and praying to gods they had long ignored. But no amount of wood or prayer could keep Lilia out. She moved through the village like a vengeful specter, striking down those who had been part of the mob that night. One by one they fell. The butcher who had jeered at her as she cried was found hanging from the rafters of his shop, his face frozen in a silent scream. The blacksmith who had mocked her beauty was discovered impaled on his own anvil, his lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. But it wasn't just death that Lilia brought. It was torment. For those who had simply watched and done nothing, she visited their homes in the dead of night, whispering their names and haunting their dreams. They woke screaming, their minds unraveling under the weight of her presence. The village became a ghost town in a matter of days. Those who survived fled, abandoning their homes and livelihoods in terror. Lilia stood in the center of the village, her work complete, and felt nothing but satisfaction. But the keeper had not lied to her. She was no longer the girl she had been. Days turned to weeks, and Lilia remained in the forest, her connection to the hollow growing stronger. The power she had once craved now consumed her, transforming her further. Her body became less human with each passing day, her limbs elongated, her skin taking on a faint, bark-like texture. Her voice grew deeper, carrying the weight of the forest's ancient grief. She was no longer Lilia. She was the Hollow's guardian, a creature of vengeance and despair. Yet, as the years passed, the memories of her humanity began to fade. The face of Yvette, the jeers of the villagers, even the warmth of the sunlight, all of it became distant, like a dream she could barely recall. The forest whispered to her, feeding her new purpose. But one day, a young girl stumbled into the forest. She was no older than 10, her face streaked with tears as she wandered through the trees. Lilia watched from the shadows, her predatory instincts stirring. The girl tripped and fell, crying out in pain. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, her voice trembling. "Someone help me." Something deep within Lilia stirred, a faint flicker of a memory, a shard of the girl she had once been. She stepped forward, her monstrous form towering over the child. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear, but she did not scream. "Are you lost?" Lilia asked, her voice softer than she intended. The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I just want to go home." For the first time in years, Lilia hesitated. The darkness within her screamed for her to take the girl's life, to feed on her fear and sorrow. But something else, a faint, buried spark of humanity, held her back. Wordlessly, Lilia extended a hand, her clawed fingers trembling. The girl hesitated, then took it. Lilia led her through the forest, the trees parting to reveal the edge of the woods. "Run," Lilia whispered, her voice cracking. The girl didn't need to be told twice. She fled, her small form disappearing into the distance. Lilia watched her go, the spark of humanity fading once more as the shadows reclaimed her. And so, the creature that had once been Lilia returned to the forest, her monstrous form melding with the darkness. She had become the spirit of the Hollow, feared by all who dared to enter her domain. But somewhere, deep within the tangled web of shadows and vengeance, a tiny piece of Lilia remained, a flicker of light in an endless sea of darkness. See you in the next video. Don't forget to support me.